and shift the center of gravity. Let me share with you what I mean. In the early days of this country, a question was raised like this: how shall we treat the slaves as it relates to property taxes? The wrong question. And the abolitionists, see, they wouldn't deal with that question. It was a political question. The abolitionist says, no, there's a higher ground. The question is not how do we deal with the slave according to property taxes. The question is, how do we get rid of slavery? Because if you deal with the wrong question, you end up with something like the 3/5 compromise, where you relegate people to fragments and fractions. And so we have to have a movement from advocates like you and me that changes the center of gravity and changes the very conversation. During the Montgomery movement, there were some that wanted Dr. King to fight for, listen, a kinder, gentler segregation. And Dr. King almost did. He was the new kid in town. It was an old man, E.G. Nixon, that had fought for America. He was an old NAACP, and he was rough. And he said, Dr. King, I didn't come out here to join with you to fight for a more kinder form of segregation. And he said, no, we must use our energy to end segregation. That is the question. Not how to get a kinder form of segregation, but how to end it. Now, let's move to our time. There are those who want to sucker us into asking this question. Like, how can we fund public education within the current tax revenue? You can't. Not like it should be, and it never has been. And you sure can't engage in that discussion with people who rob the bank and then say the bank doesn't have any money. You can't, if you play their game, you lose. So what we have to do is we have to fight to change how to debate the issue of public education that lines up with our constitutional and moral value to promote the general fair. The question is, how does investing in education build the minds and the potential of young people, and how does investment in education fuel the prospect of higher education, and how does investment in education fuel our economy, and how does public education line up with our deepest moral values, and how, if we don't fund public education, we literally take this nation down in the dumps. Those are the questions we must demand and wrestle with. Here's another one. You know, the Supreme Court had this debacle that they voted wrong. 5 of them voted to end the formula, Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. Now it's in the Congress. And it's interesting what people are saying. They're saying, well, what we've got to figure out now is how to compromise. So here's the bill that's currently before the Congress. And all of you from these 38 states, I want you to hear me, because you need to understand what's going on, and you need to go back. If you're concerned about education, you better get in the game to fight for a Voting Rights Act amendment that doesn't give us less protection than we had 49 years ago after the Edmonds-Pettit Bridge, because that's about what we're getting ready to have. And not just our friends, people you claim are your political friends, but people are compromising on sacred principles. And here's how it goes. They are saying we got to fix the formula to choose how states are included. But we got to compromise because the Tea Party is so strong. So one of the compromises goes like this: let's include Ohio, and y'all need to be included, God knows, with the stuff that they're trying to do up here and trying to stop people from voting, because that's the only way narrow-minded extremists can win. They can't win if everybody votes. So they want that. So you may have heard that Ohio is not included, but the trade-off for that is to leave Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Virginia, and Tennessee unincluded. Oh yeah, you got to read the whole book, baby. The trick is to get you all excited up here that Ohio is finally included under pre-clearance. But if you include Ohio in pre-clearance and then remove pre-clearance from 6 southern states, if you remove pre-clearance from North Carolina, where the worst voter suppression bill is now law that we're fighting right now in the courts, then you might gain in Ohio, but you're going to lose in the South. Therefore, you're going to lose in the nation. So the issue ought to be, those of you in Ohio ought to be fighting and telling your congressman, you better get North Carolina in, you better get Alabama in, and we in North Carolina ought to be saying, you better keep Ohio in, you better keep Ohio in, because unless, as Dr. King said, we learn how to live together as people, we're going to perish together as fools. That's true socially, and that's true politically. Touch your neighbor, said we got to fight that. Julian Bond says it like this: you don't ever negotiate until you fight. And the reason I showed that, and I'm almost through, the reason I showed that video is I come here to tell you it is possible to change the terms of the battle and to shift the center of gravity. Tomorrow, Monday, in North Carolina is proof. Many of you have heard that down in North Carolina, my brother here, he was there, and Randy was there with us and others. Thousands have organized. On February the 8th, Randy Weingarten was with us and other educators, NCEA and others. Nearly 100,000 people gathered in the South, in the capital. More people than gathered on the Edmonds-Pettus Bridge 49 years ago, to bring attention to this extremism. Because we understand that when you fight this kind of extremism, like the Koch brother legacy, you've got to have a mobilization that's not partisan. What we need now, 38 states, we need state-based movements. That's what Alec learned. Alec went down to the states. The Tea Party went down to the state. They said if we take over state legislatures, we can control the Congress and we can nullify the president. Now what we need are indigenously led, homegrown leadership. Nobody can fly into your state, helicopter in, have a big rally and change your state. We need homegrown leadership, state-based leadership that focuses on state government, state legislators, and state governors, and a movement that is deeply moral and deeply constitutional, and it must be anti-racism and anti-poverty.